I mean, drought, because of the way we've managed, we've reduced the amount of carbon on the soil. And in reducing that carbon, we've prevented our land from holding the moisture where it should hold it, and that's where the rain falls. And so we end up with droughts because of the way we've managed. There's no moisture that is staying where the rain falls. With the result, the springs have stopped running. We complain then that there's no water further down for people to drink. And we are trying to do reclamation of those watersheds. And in my opinion, the only way to do it is to enable ranchers and farmers to put more carbon in the soil. And in putting that carbon into the soil, we could, if 50% of the ranchers in the world were able to do some form of holistic management, we could sequestrate enough carbon so that the carbon content of the air went back to pre-industrial era within 5 years.
50%
of the ranchers practice some form of holistic management. We would sequestrate enough carbon so that the carbon content of the air would go back to pre-industrial era within 5 years.
Now, I'm not versed enough in this, but the carbon content of both the soil and the air has to do with how much rain falls, or is it just
no, it's a matter of it's the way we manage. In managing livestock, we either use the tool of fire, or we graze the grass so low that it's not able to be returned to the soil in the form of litter. And really, litter and growing plants are the skin of the soil.
Can I ask you guys to give?
I'm not sure of figures, but it's been estimated that it would be 50% of the ranchers in the world practice some form of holistic management. And what happens in holistic management is we tend to group the animals into a higher density because we're trying to emulate the big herds that used to roam here before man shot out all the wild animals. And there was a total recycling of minerals. There was water retention because we know that carbon in the soil holds water. The community dynamics, the diversity of plants were better than what they are. We've simplified them because the way we have managed. And the energy flow, which is capturing of energy, has escaped us. So where traditionally we see protein as being the limiting factor for livestock, in my belief, it is hydrogen. And hydrogen is true energy. So we need to change the way we manage to capture more hydrogen, which is for free and for nothing to a farmer or a person on the land. And we need to convert that through animals into money. Money is energy and energy is money. Time is money. So we're talking about the one thing all the time. And if we quantify most of the things we grow or do, there's a negative energy from energy in and energy out. For instance, if we grow corn and we take into consideration the energy that is lost by tilling the soil, the energy put in with fertilizer, the energy put in with diesel when working the tractor, the energy put in making the tractor, the planting of the seed, the reaping of the crop, and all the activities that you do to grow a crop, and you then sell it, you're actually on a negative energy base. And it is quite simple, but we don't look at it in terms of energy. Because we say that we've already got the tractor, we've already got the combine, but you know what can happen to the price of energy? And I question what is going to happen here and in every other country in the world when a gallon of gas gets to $200 a gallon. If you consider what the price of gas should be, look at today's price of land, the price of planting a tree, growing the tree over time. Time is money. We're then going to fell that tree to make oil. How many millions of years does it have to be under the ground to make that oil? And then we've got to extract that oil. Do you think we're paying a reasonable price for oil today? No. And the oil will run out one day because it's a fossil fuel. And one of the questions in holistic management is we question ourselves an energy source, where does the energy come from, and the use of that energy. And it's the same with money. Money source and the use of that money. And if you work it on an energy basis, we are in the negative with every action we do in this world.
What does a holistically managed world look like?
Well, in holistic management, as the word suggests, holistic, we look at the whole instead of parts. And that whole consists of the social, the environmental, and the economic aspects. Companies have come up to use the coined word triple bottom line, but very few actually practice that bottom line. They think that investing in conserving something is the environmental aspect of the triple line. When you try and conserve something and keep it as it is, you will probably lose that species. The minute you start managing for that species, things will change totally, and you will start finding, like all the virtually extinct animals in this world, if we managed for them instead of trying to conserve them, we'll change the whole dynamics and we'll start getting them to breed back.
Can you give me an example of what managing for a species is?
I think the best
I know it's not that simple, but
there is a simple example, and I'll give it to you. In our country, there's an animal called a white-tailed gnu, commonly known as a black wildebeest. And it was virtually extinct, and it was put on the CITES list. And because it was on the CITES list, it couldn't be hunted, it couldn't be shot, you couldn't trade in its horns or any body parts, and it was doomed to extinction because nobody could use it. And some clever person managed to get it delisted from the CITES list. Immediately, game farmers saw the benefit of this, and today a black wildebeest is common all over South Africa. So what happened? We subtly changed the way we managed it, the way we saw it, and all of a sudden the problem disappeared. And most of our legislation creates the problem and doesn't solve the problem. It just makes the problem worse.
Ian, what do you see as the future of industrialized factory farming around the world in terms of intensive animal confinement operations?
It's not sustainable, and it's not continue. It can't continue. The minute the price of oil goes to where it should be, all those factory farms are out of business. They're not sustainable at all.
When do you think the price of oil will be?
I won't go there. I don't know. But yeah, it's interesting that we as farmers have, and you've heard me say this, designated to the realms of bottom feeders, and we are the pits of society. And I remember my father and my grandfather being sought after to sit on boards and all sorts of things because he was a farmer. Today, nobody wants a farmer because he's stupid. And we are regarded as a stupid race, even though we're feeding the people who actually legislate against us to keep us in poverty. And it is time the world paid a proper attention to people who feed the world, because without food we're going to run into problems. And I believe a lot of the problems in North Africa are about food and not about the way they're being governed. And because it's about food, nobody wants to talk about it. It's hidden and nobody wants to go there because it's such a political issue that nobody wants to go there. I travel a lot and I can't buy a farming magazine or a farming paper or a farming book in any airport in the world. And the reason is that we farmers don't exist. And the people who own those bookstores know that farmers are too poor to travel. And that we don't travel, so they don't hold the books. And I think this is a very serious state of affairs. I really do. And then from this, we've now got big companies investing in land because land and food are becoming scarce. And the big multinational companies are now investing in the land because they can see in the future there's going to be a shortage of food and they want to be on the bandwagon. And it's quite a scary situation because the knowledge to run that and to run it sustainably remains with the manager, with the family that's been on that family farm. We send our children to university to learn all sorts of things about animal science, and yet they don't listen to the people who've lived there for 5 generations. The knowledge about that property and those animals that has been built up over 5 years, that person is given to somebody who doesn't even milk a cow to teach him how to run cattle. It's all back to front, and it's all about civilization and the way we do things in a civilized society. So I do think there's huge opportunity for something different to develop, and we need to hold the skills and the knowledge we know and not believe in just some scientist thinking about something in a laboratory.
Does that, are you talking about basically all of us becoming our own food producers? Or, I mean, if we extend what you're saying, is that...
Well, can I answer it this way?
Yeah, please.
There are not too many people in the world. They're just people in the wrong place. So if people were there producing their own food, it wouldn't be an issue. Because if we learned how to manage the soil and capture the energy from the sun, all of us would be our own solar panels and it would be sustainable. And the way it is at the moment, every mouthful of food, I believe in New York it travels 1,000 miles, every mouthful of food, not sustainable.
I have a question. What can the average person who is typically living in a city, in a pretty intense and high population area, what can people do today to help move things in a direction that's more beneficial for everybody?
People in the cities, and there's no good saying we're going to destroy the cities to put people in the right place. So today the best thing anybody can do is to make sure the product they're buying, in other words, the product that they are putting their dollar on, comes from a sustainable system. When I say system, a way of producing it. In other words, is the energy or the way that plant or that food is being produced sustainable? And in that way, in other words, pastured poultry, pastured beef, etc., are not feedlots. Minimal energy going in, maximum energy coming out. It becomes sustainable and people's health will improve. The problem we have today with illnesses mostly comes from the products we eat. And I know from watching animals, if you give an animal the right food and the animal's pH is right, that animal really doesn't get sick. And we're exactly the same as humans. We're eating the wrong things and the things are produced incorrectly. So we think we're eating meat, but in actual fact it's not meat, it's another product that has been developed by man and not by nature.
Does this also apply to just vegetable and grain crops, food that we, non-meat? Does this all apply across the board, or a way of thinking about managing?
You can't manage the soil without livestock. So the minute you go into a situation where you say that leave it to nature, in brittle environments, if you leave it to nature, you go to desert. And that's why governments have failed throughout the world, because when they see a desert approaching, and it does approach huge kilometers every year, we lose more and more natural grazing to deserts. And the reason is that everybody says it's overgrazing. Now, conventional thinking says overgrazing is tied up to the number of cattle or number of animals. It's not the case. Overgrazing, you can only overgraze plants, and if you don't give it a grazing, you will kill that plant, because it can't survive without being grazed. So we've lost our grasslands by legislation partly, and not because of the way generally what has happened there. It's purely that we need to graze. So grazing is a part of nature, and overgrazing is a factor of time and not numbers. It's where a grass plant is grazed and regrazed before it is fully recovered. And to put it simply, what happens with conventional management is that the cattle go into a paddock, they eat all the chocolates, and they're left with the boiled sweets. We then start giving them a supplement to force them to eat the boiled sweets. And it costs us money, and we have to bring in energy from outside to get them to eat that. Whereas if we trod that carbon onto the soil instead of forcing an animal to eat that carbon, those boiled sweets, we would get far more return with putting that carbon down, because of the life in the soil that will be increased and come back through the plant, through the animal, to the humans. And it's all about feeding the soil and keeping the soil covered. The growing grass and the litter on the soil is like the skin on a human. We all know what we feel like when we burnt. It hurts. So why take the skin off anything? Fire, to me, was a natural phenomena where there was too much grass, because in the previous years there might have been a drought and the animals had died off, and there was too much grass on top of that mountain, because the animals will only go up a mountain if they're forced to go up a mountain. They're not stupid. So after a drought, there are fewer animals. They don't have to eat the grass up there. They get enough below. There's then old grass at the top of the mountain. Lightning strikes and it'll burn, but it'll only burn to the bottom of the mountain, because there's no grass left down the bottom. The animals have eaten it all or trodden it flat on the ground. And that's the difference. So yes, fire is a tool, but I don't see it as a tool that can be used excessively. We've seen in Yellowstone National Park what has happened. No animals, increased number of trees, increased number of fires. California burns every year because they're not using animals to shrink the carbon and put it back on the soil. So if we're trying to develop a society without animals, or without using animals, and I explained to you earlier about the black wildebeest, use it or lose it. And if you don't use it, you'll lose it. So if we lose the animals because we're not eating them, we are actually accelerating the demise of this civilization.
So much for veganism.
Yes, we can actually look at the soil surface, and from the soil surface we can deduce the way management has taken place over the last few years. So what we're looking at when we look at the soil surface is to understand, is it covered? What sort of plants are growing there? What sort of diversity there is? What sort of insects there are, etc. And that'll give us an indication immediately as to the amount of carbon in the soil. Now, if you push a knife into the soil and you pull it out and there's soil stuck to the knife, there's sure to be a shortage of carbon in that soil. So highly carbonized soil is like butter. It goes in and it comes out clean, with no soil sticking to the blade of the knife. So what am I doing? I'm trying to enable people on the land to capture more energy, which is for free and for nothing. But not only to capture the energy, but to keep the energy, the money, in their pockets, rather than sending it to the cities where they buy all sorts of things that have been proven that we require on the farm. For instance, insecticides, herbicides, tractors, balers, etc. We actually don't need them. We just need to manage differently, and we will capture that energy. And the price of beef can come down, because the price we are producing it for, will come down when we manage properly, when we're capturing the amount of energy on our solar panel. And when I talk about solar panel, anybody who is on the land is actually by default in the energy business. So we need to capture that energy. That energy is what we're selling through the animals to get money. So money is energy. And we need to put that together, and we need to keep it on the land instead of it filtrating into the cities. I will take an example of an abattoir, how things have been taken, and at the end of the day, we farmers have paid for it all. And what happens is an abattoir will start in a rural area. It will then slaughter animals, and eventually it will slaughter so many animals, and under the guise of efficiency, they'll bring in another department, and it'll be called a hides department. So not only is the animal now slaughtered, but there's a department that deals with the hides. And then later on there's too much offal, so there's an offal department. And then there's another department, a marketing leg. And then there's a deboning leg. And so it goes. So from originally it was the farmer and the consumer, or the rancher and the consumer. And today we end up with the rancher, 30 people between the consumer. The consumer is squealing that they're paying too much. The rancher is not sustainable because he's not getting enough for his product, but everybody in between is living a very good life. So we've got the bull by the udder. Things are wrong. Let's change the way we think and look at things to make sure that our civilization is sustainable.
So what I hear you saying is that if you were to talk to a person who's in their teens, that there is actually a way to make a living by being a farmer.
Absolutely. There's a huge way of making a living at being a farmer. To me, as I've said before, there's going to be a shortage of food, and if he understands the land and he can produce more than double of what the existing production is, just by understanding nature and using nature rather than throttling nature. We as humans tend to control things, so we destroy nature, but we need to nudge nature and understand her to make sure that we're capturing a maximum amount of units of energy.
A lot of people are leaving rural areas because they don't believe that they can support themselves. And this trend is pretty much played out. I think that most rural communities are resigned to the fact that their young people are going to leave, go to the city. What do you see are some positive steps to reverse that process?
We just have to need to change what we teach our youngsters. As I've said before, a lot of the knowledge is actually out there on the family farms, but we choose not to use it. So until we start looking at holes within holes, understanding what happens in nature, and make sure that we capture the energy we're required to do. If I'm talking of a solar panel, and we know that man-made solar panels only capture roughly 32% of the energy available, and yet you take a leaf, be it from a tree or from a grass plant, it's capturing over 90% of the energy available. So what are we doing? Richard Branson has offered a £10 million prize to a person who develops a machine that will sequestrate carbon. I wrote him a letter, he didn't even reply. All I was going to do was mob my cattle, put the carbon in the soil, and I was hoping to get £10 million. He didn't even reply because I'm a farmer.